Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about the Redshift Render View, or IPR. In this lesson you will learn not only the basics, but some of the more advanced features that it has to offer. So let's jump in and see what it's all about. Okay, so today we're talking about Redshift's IPR window. Now, for those of you who are familiar with third-party rendering packages, this is going to feel pretty familiar to you, and you should feel right at home pretty quick. And for those of you who aren't, this will be a nice little introduction into the world of IPR windows and just kind of how they work. And for those of you also who are familiar, we're going to start with the basics, but then we're also going to move up to the more advanced stuff. So feel free to skip ahead until there's something you might not know. So what's an IPR window? So an IPR window is basically a way of getting a preview of your final output. So when you come in here, we're all familiar with grayscale worlds and kind of how they work. Is where you build your models and whatnot. But what happens when I want to see my lighting and my rendering, what happens when I want to see like what this is going to look like? So let's go up to Redshift and let's go ahead and open up the IPR window. So let's go to Redshift Render View. As soon as you do that, you're going to see it opens up a window, and this is just a previous render that I had before. But you're going to see there's a bunch of buttons up here at the top that we're about to talk about. Most importantly, the play button, and the play button is essentially the on and off switch. So let's go ahead and hit it. And let's turn it on. And right away you're going to see we get kind of this grainy preview that's happening. And what this is this is a progressive preview. So it's progressively getting better. So you can see here at the bottom we have a bar that's moving up. And it's progressively just going to get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner until it can't get any cleaner. And the reason why it does this is it gives you the flexibility to kind of move around with a low res image. Because you don't always need to see it kind of high res and clear all the time. Like I can get an idea of like, okay, this kind of looks like what I want or what I don't want. Like I like the way that this light is falling off, or I don't, etc. So it's going to just keep going and going and going until it reaches its full quality. So that's cool. So we can get nice instant previews that are happening here, relatively real time. So that's what the play button does. It just kind of activates everything. After that, I'd say the most next important thing is your scaling. So your scaling dictates how fast you're going to see this, I would say. So what you have here on the left is you have your actual zoom, so 100% zoom. And over here, this one is your resolution. So if I go to 100, right now I am set to... My resolution is set to 1920 by 1080. So if I'm at 100 and 100, I'm at 1920, 1080, full resolution in progressive mode. But if all of a sudden I put this down to 50%, then my resolution is 960 by 540. So I've essentially cut that in half. So the general rule of thumb is think of this as in like Photoshop or After Effects. This left side is your zoom. So if I zoom in, I'm going to be it's going to get less and less quality. I'm just zooming into still pixels. Whereas over here, if I up this to 100%, this is actually my resolution that I'm upping. So I consider these probably the second most important thing that you should know within here. Now, this mode right here is the default. It's called fixed scaling. And this is pretty much what I always leave it on, but they do have original size, and basically that's going to be exactly what you think it is. It's going to keep it to the original 1920, 1080. They have fit to window, which is going to try to fit to the window, and it's also going to change the resolution as you scale it down. So now it's going to be like a super low resolution because that's all it needs to be. And then they have this kind of strange one. It's called fill window, and fill window will actually change your aspect ratio. So you can see I got a wider lens here based on the size of my window. Now, I don't know when I would ever need this. I've never used it, but it's there. I always work with fixed scaling, so we're just going to leave it on that. So right now we're actually working at 960 by 540. Okay, the next most important thing that I think that you should know is bucket rendering. So as I mentioned before, progressive rendering is going to constantly be trying to update until it finally reaches its full quality. Now bucket rendering is going to be almost the opposite. As soon as I hit this button right here, you're going to see it's going to create initial pass, and then it's going to come through with these buckets, as they call them. There's like big chunks of pixels that it takes out, and it's going to render your full quality of whatever settings you've told Redshift to do. So you can kind of think of bucket rendering as like, all right, I'm getting close to the end and I want to kind of start to see if this quality is good enough. You know, is my grain low enough, or are these textures high enough quality? I need like more final results. So you can think of bucket rendering like that. And there's tons of information on bucket rendering out there. I'm not going to dive too deep, but bucket rendering, the general of thumb, when you're getting close to the end, turn on bucket rendering. So for now, I don't need it because we're demonstrating. You can see if I turn here and stuff, it's going to be, you can see how much slower it is. I don't see it update right away, right? It's like super slow. But there's a reason, and it's because it's high quality. Okay, moving on. The next most important thing, we're going to turn off bucket rendering, and then we're going to go to, I'm going to put this back down to 50 because I don't need it that high. The next most important thing that I would say that we would like to see is this. It's crop to region, I think is what they call it. So basically, this is just going to render what's in this region. So it's just anything that changes within this region will get re-rendered. And you can imagine why this is useful. If you have a really heavy scene, you can just render that part or just view that part. Like, oh, I just need to see what this like sign says or whatever. And then I can do that. Okay. Works with bucket rendering too. Let's see. So after that, I'd say the next important thing that you should know is in your progressive mode, you also have this option to do IPR undersampling. So right now it's at 0, so that means it's not going to do any undersampling. But let's set it to 2 and watch what happens when I move around. Now it's much more pixelated. I'm going to put this like 75. It's much more pixelated and chunky, but I can move around much quicker, right? I can actually get like a quick preview. Whereas if I go back to 0, you'll see it's a little slower, right? It's just a little bit slower. And then if I go to, let's put it up to 3, it's going to be the most chunky, super chunky, right? But look at how fast I can move. And I can kind of understand still what's happening. So IPR undersampling is good when you have a heavy scene and you just want to move quick, which I think we all want to move quick as much as we can. Okay, so next, I think for the basics, that's probably the most important things that you would want to know. And next, we're going to move on to some of the more advanced work, right? Like if we wanted to, get a little bit more advanced with the IPR window, what options do we have? So I'm just going to start from left to right. So the first thing that I would say is more advanced is right here, you have an option to view all your AOVs. So by default, it goes to your beauty. But if you have additional AOVs set up, you can come in here and you can just select them, and you can see like right here is my reflections pass, this is my spec pass, and so on. And then as you add more AOVs in here, it's like I'll put emissions in there. And as I add that, now I have emissions in this tab, right? So that's what that does. It's really useful if you need to, see your passes. I don't find myself using this too much, but you have your separate channels, RGB, alpha, maybe alpha I use sometimes. Next one here is the denoiser pass. So if you have a denoise on, then this will be activated. So let me show you how this works. So if you come over here to your render settings and you go to basic denoise, and that's already set. And then it has to be on bucket rendering. So turn on bucket rendering. And I'm going to just do a crop of this because it's kind of heavy. So let's turn this on. And you'll see right away, watch this when I turn it on, this beauty is going to turn to beauty noise. And so what beauty noise is going to do is it's going to show us the beauty pass before the denoise has been applied. So if I come in here, we'll wait for it to render. So if I come in here and if I toggle it on and off, you're going to see, I'm going to zoom in as best I can. Hopefully you guys can see it. So right now it's a little noisy here, but if I turn on my denoise pass, you're going to see, the beauty pass, that it's going to toggle between them. It's kind of hard to tell right now because I don't have the settings too high. Yeah, you can tell right here a little bit. Zoom in. Yeah, you can see it. So basically it's just a toggle between your denoised and undenoised. I don't find myself using it that much, but it's there in case you need it. I'm going to turn off this denoise now and turn off bucket rendering. Okay, next we have our camera views. So this is basically, this would probably be in the basics, I would say. So your camera views are basically, yeah, what camera do you want to render? So for my camera view right now, it's locked, right? So if I unlock it and I go to auto, it's basically saying whatever I'm seeing here, it's going to put on screen. So let me turn this off. Turn this down. Ah, I'm on caustics, that's why. Okay, put it back on the beauty pass. So if I'm on auto and then I switch all of a sudden to a perspective view, you'll see if I come over here, it's going to switch to this view, right? So basically, yeah, it's going to just automatically switch to whatever view you're in. So camera 1, camera 2, doesn't matter. But let's say I want that locked. So if you want it locked, that's what this lock switch is for. So you lock it, right? So I'm going to lock it to camera 1. So I can just say camera 1, lock it. It automatically locks it if you select it. Now, if I come out here and I start to move a different camera, this doesn't change. This stays exactly the same. So I can come out here and move, and it stays exactly the same. So that's all that does. It just selects your cameras and you can lock it. Moving down the list, we have, this is freeze tessellation. For freeze tessellation, I'm going to come over here to a separate project to demonstrate. So basically, if you're familiar with adaptive tessellation within Redshift, basically this just freezes it. So if I come here and I'm going to do my startup user, if I come over here and I hit the play button, you'll see that I have a wireframe on here to show you what's happening, but also I have this cube that's tessellated, and as I pull further back, that tessellation is going to get less and less and less because it doesn't need it. Now I'm not going to dive too deep into this because it's about the IPR, but basically if you if the further you zoom out, the less geometry that actually creates because it doesn't need it. But to demonstrate how this works, if I freeze this now and then I come all the way back in, you'll see that my geometry is much less now because I froze it when I was zoomed out and it didn't need that much. But when I click it back on, it gets to a higher density because it needs it. So that's all that does. It's basically if you have high density meshes and you start to move around and it becomes kind of sluggish when you're moving around, you can hit the freeze tessellation button and you're good to go. And just so you know, maybe I'll do a separate tutorial on this, but you can find this under geometry tessellation, and then it's this screen space adaptation is the option I'm talking about. So you can read up on that too if you want. All right, moving on. Freeze geometry. So freeze geometry is next, and that is this one right here, this snowflake in the G. So all that does is basically if any geometry changes its actual shape, it's going to not update in the screen. I find this is very helpful with displaced objects. So if I have an object that's displaced and is trying to update, or if I'm trying to pan around, it's constantly trying to update and it doesn't need to. But I find that if I turn this on, I work lightning fast. So I'm going to come out here and just change this bear's geometry, like pull this way out. And you'll see that in my viewport, nothing happens. But if I turn it back on, now it's updated. So that's all that does. Again, it's just a time saver. So it's not constantly updating because you got to remember that the IPR window, I mean, it's always trying to update, always, unless you turn the play button off. So, you know, having said that, sometimes you do have to be mindful about, you know, your workflow and how you're doing things. So it just freezes geometry, is all it does. Any polygons that change. All right, next, so next is this, and basically this is your preview mode. So it's like, what are you seeing? So you have regular, which is what it defaults to. Clay, which is more for like lighting, right? So I just realized I don't have something on. So the clay mode is basically just for lighting. I have a whole nother tutorial on this, and you can watch that if you'd like. But basically clay mode turns off textures and unnecessary things. And it's more about just figuring out your lighting. And then lastly is samples. So samples requires bucket rendering, and you'll see it automatically turns it on when I do this. So what it's going to do, it's going to show you where your samples are concentrated. And Redshift being a biased render, this can be important because sometimes certain areas can be noisier than others, and you want to concentrate your samples, your rays at certain areas. So, you know, with this pass, I can see that I have a lot concentrated here, you know, at his neck, on his eyes, and I have less concentration over here. So basically, the whiter it is, the heavier concentration, and the darker it is, the less concentration of samples. And then, yeah, again, a whole separate tutorial, but that's what this is for. Yeah, it's to see where your samples are. All right. Actually, I want to turn my glass back on. I forgot I turned it off. All right, and turn off bucket rendering. All right, moving on, you have a couple options here. So this is to change your focus. So this is pretty cool. So if I come here and if I go to my bokeh, select my camera, turn on my bokeh, what I can actually do, which is pretty awesome, if I click this button, I can now select the object that I want to be focused. So click this button, select, I'm gonna actually have to turn off my glass, unfortunately, because it's gonna try to select that, and select this cloud. You'll see that it puts the cloud in focus. Oops, I'm getting a little closer here. I'm gonna crank up this to 15 or something so you can see it. All right, so everything's out of focus. I'm gonna come here, select the cloud. Now the cloud's in focus. Select the bear. Now the bear is in focus. Select the tree. Now the tree's in focus. It's pretty awesome. And then you can see on your top view, oops, this is where locking your viewport comes in handy. So if I go to my top view, you'll see my camera's focal distance will change too. So if I come in, I select this cloud, or the bear. Hello. Oh, it's the wrong camera I'm looking. Let me turn off. Let me put this camera back on and then lock this. Okay, there we go. So now we can see this camera right here. Its focal distance will change as I select this. And then if I select the tree, it's going to go back in. That's all that does. So this is the object selector, and same deal. I can come in here and I can select an object, and it's just going to select it in my scene. So if I select the bear, it's going to select the bear, and so on. Moving on, this one is to select your material. So if I come here, it's the same concept. I can come over here, and when I select this, it's going to select this material for me. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my bokeh. All right, so if I want this sign, select it, it puts it over here. Moving on, if we have, all right, so this, all right, I'm gonna skip this one for now. This one right here, this is actually your snapshots. If I wanna take a snapshot, I'm gonna hit this button. You're gonna see it's automatically gonna open my snapshot viewer down here. Snapshot viewer down here has some functionality. So basically what it does, oh, I was in material mode. Let me redo this. Sorry. Turn that off, and then turn that off, and then let's take a snapshot. There we go. So the snapshot mode down here is kind of like what you are familiar with when you take a snapshot with C4D. The main difference is that it puts in its own little window, and you can set your A and your B, and you can also apply post effects to it. I don't find myself using this as much, but it exists. You can test it, see if it works for you. Let's turn that off. And then if you want to put in your picture viewer, this is what I find myself using. So if I want to take a snapshot of this, but put in C4D's picture viewer, click this button. This to me is more functional than the snapshot viewer. Okay, and then this button right here, this is to copy to your clipboard. So if I take this and I hit this, if I select it, come over here and I paste, all of a sudden it's just pasted it for me. So it just copies it to your clipboard, and then you can do what you want with it. Yeah, I think that's we're winding down here as far as the functionality. So the one last thing is the settings icon over here. So if you click this is almost a whole separate series of itself. I've covered a few of these in the past, but it's kind of this hidden menu here, and you can apply different workspaces or LUTs to it as you need. You can also do simple color corrections. You can apply post effects. Yeah, all sorts of things you can do, and then you can also apply that to the final renders. So that's also hidden under here. You have pixel information, which yeah, might be used to you if you want to know a certain color or whatnot. And as far as the basics, I think we've pretty much covered it. I mean, basics and the advanced. I mean, this is pretty much it. There's some like, customization stuff you can do up here, but you can dig into that yourself. So this was a full introduction into the Redshift IPR, and I hope it helped you, whether you are a beginner or an advanced user. And I will see you on the next one.